Understanding the inverse square law is a powerful tool. And I know some of you right now are, I don't know math and it seems so complicated. I want to give a very simple way to explain this with an illustration to show you that there's nothing to fear here. So it's going to be a valuable tool controlling your light. Let's look at this first example. And let's go ahead and do a standard shot where we can use our chart. We are at f16, ISO 100, and according to my chart, it says that my flash should be on full power at ISO 100 and f16. The light will travel 6 feet to my subject. The inverse square law says if you half the distance, you're going to gain 4 times as much light. So instead of full, I could half that light, which is half power. That's 1 stop. Then I could half it again and get me 1/4 power. And that's 2 stops, which is the inverse square law. So every time you half the distance, you gain 2 more stops in light. The next illustration shows that when I move the flash 1/2 the distance closer, now it's at 3 feet, the correct exposure is going to be not at full power. And most people think, oh, okay, half the distance, half the light. No. Inverse square law says 2 stops difference, not 1 stop. So you're going to half that light. From full to 1/2 is 1/2, and then you're going to half it one more time, bringing it to 1/4 power. And that's a lot of light saving. And you have to understand this because when you're going out and let's say you're using a standard flash with 4 AA batteries in it, well, most of those flashes only give you on one set of batteries about 100 full power flashes. And so you want to go out on a session and you're going to run through those 100 flashes real quick if you're shooting in a bright day. So that's why you've got to conserve your power. Get that light as close as possible to the subject. Not only will it be softer, but you will save a tremendous amount of power. Another reason why you want to get your light close as possible to the subject, not only will it be softer, but when you're using less power, it will recycle faster. At full power, your flash could recycle at anywhere from 2 seconds to 5 seconds. But let's say in this particular situation, you move your light half the distance and now you put it at 1/4 power. You could rip off at least 4 shots as fast as you wanted, which is a huge advantage. Instead of waiting 2-4 seconds after every shot, you can shoot at will if you bring that light in closer and reduce that power. Here's another difference. If I shot my standard flash at 1/4 power, I would get now more than 400 shots. Versus if I use it at full power, I only get 100. I try not to use my flash at full power. I try to bring my light in as close as possible and use a lower power. Not only will it conserve my battery life, but I also get faster recycle times. Another benefit is that when you come closer to your subject, you can create a spotlight on your subject and have the light fade off from the main part that you want to illuminate. So often I will bring that light in close, I'll illuminate the face area, and then that light fades off the body, and so your eye will just gravitate to the face because it's the brightest part of the picture, but it's not an abrupt distinct. It's just kind of a gradual fade, and that's very pleasing for portraits to do that. Some people put a grid on their flash to do it, but you can do it just by simply bringing your light closer to your subject. And you can see in the illustration how that light kind of narrows as you bring it in closer. And so now you have more control of where you want to place that light. That is talking about the flash strength, bringing it in closer. Another huge factor that you have to understand is the light fall off. So let's go back to the first illustration and how it is, however far back you have the light to your subject, that's how far it's going to travel behind your subject and illuminate whatever's behind it. So if you're 6 feet back from your subject, it's going to also travel 6 feet behind your subject, and then it's going to gradually fall off. Now, why is that important? Well, you may not want the background illuminated, or you may want it illuminated, but you need to know how to control that with your light. For example, if you're shooting a shot and you have that background gelled a certain color, you don't want light from your main light to spill over and contaminate that gelled light you have on the wall or wherever you have it. And so you have to contain that light right on the subject and drastically fall off. Let's go down to the next illustration. And now you can see when that light is 3 feet from the subject, it's going to go 3 feet behind the subject and then drastically fall off. If your subject is, say, 6 feet away from the wall, or even 9 feet away from the wall, and you're 3 feet from your subject, the main light is 3 feet from your subject, it's going to travel 3 feet to your subject, then it's going to travel 3 feet behind your subject, and it's going to drastically fall off. If your background was, say, another 3 or 6 feet behind, that light will no way affect whatever light you put on your backdrop or behind them. Or you may want it completely black and dark. It's up to you. It's your vision. I am just telling you the tools on how to accomplish your vision, and this is the understanding of the inverse law. 1, there's the strength factor that you have to understand. 2, there's the recycle speed of your flash. And 3, there's the narrowing and controlling of the light. And 4, there's the light fall off. And the inverse square law affects all 4 of those factors. And you need to know it in order for you to master flash.